Tessa, welcome to the WP Minute.
Excited to be here.
I obviously know you from the WordPress space. You're not doing much WordPress these days, but I am excited to have a perspective from somebody who was really vested in WordPress and now exploring other things in the web tech space. You're going to define that in a moment. But this series is all about sort of uncovering the challenges that freelancers, boutique agencies have had in 2024 running their business, your perspective into launching into 2025 and what that might look like. So for the uninitiated, what does Tessa do these days?
Oh, that's a loaded question. What Tessa does these days is I help anyone who is targeting developers as their user audience, and I help them go to market. So a lot of it, it's market insights into that research, understanding those developers, understanding that technical stack that they're building within, and helping them understand how to take that and actually go to market in an effective way with developers. If folks don't know, developers are a little different, right? We don't really want to talk to salespeople. We don't want to talk to marketing people. So you got to find those people where they're at and really truly engage in that authentic way. So it's kind of a TLDR, but yeah.
I've seen a lot of roles. I mean, in fact, I would say that like my day job at Gravity Forms as, I don't even know what the official title is. Don't tell my boss, but I think it's something like, community lead for WordPress. It sort of gets bucketed into developer relations to a degree, though I'm not a developer. I'm much more of a power user, but so are a lot of like Gravity Forms users. They're power users, with X% being like the real, hardcore developer. And this is a role that I see, Automatic constantly hiring for, especially now in WooCommerce. I've seen a lot of their job postings coming up with pushing into that space. A lot of hosting companies as well with developer relations. It's important. It's like, customer service for your product at the end of the day. It's like, how do I reach these folks? And, I like to think of it as, is it just because you can speak developer-ish? Is that like the essence of this role? Because that's what it is for me, but is that the essence of DevRel in your world?
Yes, honestly, I think that it really is, right? Because at the end of the day, it's, coming back to sort of the sense of, we're like adverse to marketing, we're adverse to, sort of sales. But even when you think about sort of the Gravity Form, right? Power user over here, although I haven't built in WordPress in a couple of years, but love Gravity Forms. Like, wow, can it do some awesome stuff? And that it's still sort of this like audience of people that are building things, right? They might not be the hardcore quote unquote developers, right? That we might be thinking of, but they're still developers nonetheless. They're like builders, right? They're bringing those things together. They're creating something. And I think when you're that type of personality, it just works when someone authentically engages with you. And to actually kind of take that a step further, I believe that if all companies started operating in the way that DevRel operates, where we get to know our audience and we actually authentically engage in them where they're at, I think everyone would find a lot of growth from that tactic. And so, fundamentally, I think that it's really about getting down there and like hanging out with those users, and like, who doesn't want that from a company,
We are going to talk about the challenges of 2024 and then what your perspective is into 2025. But I love this topic, and I want to go a little bit just deeper. This seems like a dream role. When I left my other career in the podcast industry, capital P and capital I, like being somebody who has been a podcaster for over a decade and then like had a career in it for a little while. Yep. I was like, man, this is great, and I really started to see more DevRel stuff pop up, right? Be this community liaison, really know the product. It sounds great on the outside. And I'm sure just like if you made a job posting for content marketer, a gazillion people will come through the doors looking for this. How does one stand out? How does one really take this job serious where it's not just show up at WordCamps and high five each other and eat some cupcakes? What does it really take to be in this profession professionally?
Yeah, I love what you just said, because I think that a lot of sort of DevRel as a big tech trend, so let's call it that, right? Because DevRel has been around for years. I mean, Apple started it back in the 70s. They understood that technical audiences were different. They needed to approach it differently. But when you look at it today, and even honestly, when you look at sort of DevRel programs that were created over the pandemic time, it was a lot of that. it was a lot of eating cupcakes and hanging with your friends. And it does work and it can work, right? But at the end of the day, it only works for so long. And if you're actually not focused and targeted and being really strategic about where you're eating those cupcakes, that value isn't going to be there. And so I think that really what I feel is the true essence of DevRel is actually being that voice, right? You're that voice for the company. And it's not that you're the only voice for the company. Of course, there are many people inside of a company that should and could be a voice for a company, but you are that voice with that user base that you are focused on, right? And so you're out there, you're advocating for the company, you're learning, you're absorbing, you're hanging with the peers. Ideally, they're falling into that very perfect target audience that your company is looking for. And you're bringing everything that you're learning back to the company. And I think that there's often that gap or that void where the insights aren't being brought back to the company so that we can continually improve what marketing is working, what sales tactics will work, what product, features should we pivot to, should we bring in, what are we not considering, right? And so I think a really good DevRel program, although yes, lovely job, I've had it for the last 10 years, it can be really beautiful. It also is a job where like you are tasked with driving some sort of objective or some sort of results, right? And those results need to be clear and the company needs to see that. And so that kind of speaks to sort of the COVID trends we were seeing in which DevRel was created and that impact was just not as visible as it needed to be.
Yeah. Once again, I have, and I'm curious on the exterior, if you can comment on the exterior of the WordPress community, but I am lucky enough, obviously, to have the role that I have at Gravity Forms to do this kind of thing. And I also come with, once again, I've been like building community and connecting with others for over a decade, having run my own agency and then just like doing this whole podcasting thing to just keep my ear to the ground of WordPress.
Yep.
Which is very hard to like quantify that to your boss.
It is.
But it's such a huge part of the relations phrase in developer relations, right? It's like I spend my time talking to people and understanding the market so that I can relay this back to product. I can relay this back to marketing. I can relay this back to C-suite to understand what's happening over here in the WordPress space. So I find it easy in the WordPress space because it is big, but also insular, and we have a tight group of people and I can stay connected to these people. But I can only imagine that might be difficult on the exterior of WordPress, like other platforms, other coding tools, other technologies. Is it challenging, and how do you quantify that relationship part in this whole thing? Yeah.
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I think when you look at sort of these, thinking about WordPress, I think WordPress has this ecosystem and this community around it that makes it feel so tight. Right? It makes you feel like when you're there, when you're hanging with those people, you feel connected, right? You feel very well connected. And I think that's the beautiful thing of WordPress, or, has been the beautiful thing in WordPress most recently. Maybe that's shifting. We'll see. But I think that, when you're in these other ecosystems, it's no different, right? They are all the same. There's this sort of ecosystem around anything, right? And is this kind of like where you're asking sort of, it feels like it's easy to stay connected in WordPress, but maybe not as easy in other spaces.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that it can feel that way. So going back to when I was in WordPress in my prime, right? I had shifted out of WordPress and took a role at Circle CI, right? I was like, yes, I'm nerding out on the CI/CD stuff. This is fun. I love it. WordPress played a pivotal role in my career from the beginning up until I, moved on to that role, and honestly still does. I have WordPress clients today. I was worried about that. I was worried getting out of an ecosystem that I was so deeply tied in and so deeply, I don't want to say known, but my connections were deep, right? They all happen everywhere you go, because at the end of the day, if you're the kind of person that thrives on that, you enjoy hanging out with people, you enjoy meeting people, you enjoy being a part of that ecosystem and bringing all those great insights back, you're going to find your crew no matter where you go. It can feel scarier though, right? Because you're going into something new and you're still trying to sort of forge that in. But it's actually interesting. I've been pulling together sort of these just one-off developer events where I'm like, hey, just come hang out, because I'm realizing how much we like deeply miss the community-driven events and engagement. And so I think honestly, when you're looking at other ecosystems, it's no different, right? It's just like, how do we start to dive into that ecosystem? Who are the players in there? And right, how do we just put ourselves out there? And I think that's the biggest thing, right? I think that's why like you're so great at your job and why you are so, able to do like what is like such a fun quote unquote job, right? Is that it's because you're able to go out there, build those relationships, understand what businesses need from all of your experience, right? And be able to bring that forward. And I think if anyone has those chops or those, interests in doing so, right? Like you're going to have that interest no matter what ecosystem you're in.
Yeah. Let's start to talk about some of the challenges, but we're going to keep it with you first, and we're going to keep it under the umbrella of developer relations here. When you're looking for clients, do you have to target clients that understand what community means to their brand? I can imagine like some, software company being like, we need developer relations. We don't know anything about community. We've never invested in it before. I can imagine that's like, a WordPress freelancer going, I'm going to go build a website for a restaurant because their website is terrible. But then you find out that restaurant website owners are just way too busy. They don't have the budget. They don't have the technical understanding. So it's a bad fit for a client. It looks like, obvious low-hanging fruit. And then you get there and it's like, this is just a rotten apple. This is not going to help. Is that the same particular challenge that you might face when you're trying to find customers that just don't get community?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good question. Okay. So yes, that is very much a trend and sentiment in what I would say would be in more established companies. So throughout my career, I have been at what I would say is more established companies. I've been at some startups, right? And I've also been at some enterprise companies, most recently left Snapchat, where I was leading the AR SDK over there. So it's like a pretty big deal working with enterprise companies to get that integrated and such. So different. So coming into, I would say, sort of middle stage startup into enterprise and sort of beyond, absolutely. There is definitely a shift that you have to start to almost like forge with them around, hey, here's why developer relations is valuable. And sometimes they have technical founders, right? They're years from it because they're established companies, right? But they forget what it's like to be a developer. They forget what it's like to sort of be this user that's like, I don't want to hang out with sales or marketing, and I kind of just want to find my crew, And so yes. However, in my scenario, I targeted essentially my target audience, so I didn't have to do that work because I'm so burnt out on that work. It's something that in DevRel is very common to have to advocate for. Here's what DevRel, and here's why we do it, and here's how developers think. And it gets exhausting, right? It's like having an accountant constantly having to tell you, you have to do your taxes, you have to pay your bills, right? Like no one wants to chase down someone.
You want to lose weight, Matt? Stop eating pizza. It's just like, yeah,
but pizza's so good.
So good.
But in my business, I focus on early stage dev tool technical founders. And so I did that for, obviously, you can probably figure out a number of reasons. Technical founders, I want to hang out with my peers. I want to hang out with other devs because I'm a dev. But then on the early stage, right, they're not thinking about, community versus not community versus whatever, right? They're thinking about growth. All they care about is growth. They need to get developers to their platform. They don't really care about the technique. They just want to know what's going to be the best approach to drive that growth immediately. And so they're eager, they're scrappy, they're fast moving. Those are my people. And so in that case, I don't have to explain it to them because they, for the most part, are a lot closer to the original days of building their product. They're a lot closer to being a developer. And now there are a lot of really great resources out in the world that are really speaking to DevRel and why it's so valuable. And so most of them come in with some understanding that developer relations and community is going to be valuable. But if they don't, it's still us talking about, hey, you have to be where your devs are because they're not going to come through ads or these other technical channels.
Yeah.
Not technical, normal channels.
Right. I want to try to pull together the experiences that you have now sort of outside of WordPress and how it might relate to the WordPress listener that we have listening to us right now. Yeah. I was talking to my writer, Eric Karkovac, earlier today, and we were just like just talking about the industry in general. And one of the things that I still see today in the WordPress world, I stumbled upon a plugin that I just found interesting. Never heard about it before, but I hit the pricing page and it was the typical $47.97, $147 for the price. And I'm like, are we still doing that in 2024? Like, are we still, that's what we're still charging these days? We all realize we're headed into 2025, right? And like sustainability and survivability is like a thing, and like making money isn't bad, and the prices should go up because the prices of my bananas have gone up. So certainly this piece of software should go up. Is there a thread there that you see now, being on the exterior of WordPress, learning from all these other bigger tech outfits, or even the startup outfits that you're working with, that you look at and say, hey, WordPress, get a little bit better with this thing that you're doing, whether that's pricing or packaging or presenting to your end user? Is there a thread there that you can pull on that from your experience these days?
Yeah, I love what you said there, because I was definitely picked up a lot of what you were saying in terms of, sort of the advancements. Yes. And so here's the thing, and I spent a great deal of time in Drupal as well. And before that in Joomla. So I've got just a great deal of sort of the open source kind of that vibe, right? The people are different. And so I think what's really interesting about that is that we see in WordPress a very open source mentality type of a pricing structure, right? Which is very much what you're alluding to. I'm just going to charge you a little bit of money, and maybe even sometimes you're getting a lifetime license, or even sometimes you're getting, all the bells and whistles for $47, which you'll never see that in big tech, right? Absolutely will never see that. And there's good and there's bad here, right? And I think that when we look at the WordPress community and the people who are the developers who are used to the open source kind of model and methodology, even in big tech, you will see them not charging as much. You will also see them giving away things for free. You will see them, building big, beautiful projects with no monetary value, because that's the mission and what they want to do. However, there's always going to be that, right? There's always going to be that open source version, or that free version, or that freemium version. I think that in the cases of WordPress, I think that what is happening is that folks feel like, because the ones that may be vocal, or the ones that they're experiencing, are the ones that only want to pay the $47. And this is very much where it comes into a lot of the work that I do in my business. And the early part when I'm working with a client is the market research. How can we understand the value at which a tool or a product for a developer is providing, and what are they willing to pay for that? I actually go out and talk to their target audience, and I'm like, would you buy this? What would you pay for it? I don't say, would you buy this? Because that's a horrible question. You want to ask the question. You want to ask the question of, is there value in this for you? And if there is, how do you envision using it, right? And then from there, there's the follow-up question of, okay, hey, yeah, let's dive into actual pricing. What are you willing to pay? And I think that oftentimes WordPress generally, right, will just go with, hey, here's what my peers are doing. But at the end of the day, WordPress is was it 43, 44? I can't remember the exact percentage now that WordPress is hosting of the web. Imagine that, huge, big brands. I mean, we've got Coke, we've got Disney, we've got just huge brands, right? They're not caring about a $47 plugin. They need the functionality that they need. Now, I can't necessarily speak to Disney and exactly what plugins they need and how they build their infrastructure and how they care about that. There's lots of great people that I know have been on your show that can. But when you think about it from that space, I think what happens in WordPress is they just get so stuck in, this is the way. This is the way, this is how we price, and we're always going to do a Black Friday sale, which also I just laugh about, because why Black Friday? Really? Devs are spending money all the time. The Black Friday thing just makes me chuckle, because it is such a constant thing. But at the end of the day, I'm not thinking about buying a tool on Black Friday, right? I'm thinking about buying a tool when I'm in the pain point, I have that problem, and I need a resolution. And I'm not saving that pain point for Black Friday. So it's interesting to me that, some of the trends and things that we see in some of these open source communities versus what we see in big tech, right? I could go on for a long time on this, but when we first DM'd each other on Twitter, which was nearing about a month ago, before setting up this call, you mentioned that you could share some challenges without name dropping any particular clients. Are there particular challenges in 2024 that you're seeing across the board from the brands that you're working with or customers you have worked with outside of WordPress? We just talked about some of the challenges that WordPress has, but what are the challenges in your space that clients might be running into for you? Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So I have a couple things. AI being one of them. Let's come back to that because I know
Yes,
that's kind
I
of
love
a loaded
that.
one.
I like to leave that to the end because I know the listener wants that.
Yes.
So
They want it. Let's make them wait for it. Okay, so
Yes.
let's talk about that. I think one of the biggest things that I'm seeing is around sort of our economic times, right? Like we are seeing a very strict tightening of budgets in big tech where those budgets used to be a little bit more loose, a little bit more, yeah, it's fine. Go take people to dinner, where now it's like, who did you take to dinner? How much did that cost you? Where did you go? Did you stay within budget? Where's the receipts? What was the value you got out of that conversation, right? And years ago, we didn't see that as much. I think we still saw it. There's always been a scenario where people are, shifting and hustling and whatever, but in the norm of things, it's a lot less common. And so with that, what I've actually learned is VC change. So a lot of venture capital trending and a lot of different investment trends. Previously, you could show traction. Hey, I've got users I'm retaining, users that haven't churned, users who are continuing to find value. And maybe they weren't always a paid user, where now those VCs are like, what's the revenue? And it isn't about adoption, It's about revenue. We want to see adoption plus revenue. And I think coming back to the conversation we just had around pricing, right? That's everything. If you're in a space where you're looking to get funded, I know WordPress and VC funding are not always, in a combination together, but should someone be thinking about that, that's definitely those trends now of like, we used to be able to just prove adoption and now we need they want to see those dollar bills, y'all.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way about, there's so many correlations between like what I see trending in, let's say, content marketing, again, because of like AI and just like attention and just so much stuff happening. So many people from years ago were like, oh, great, I have, whatever the number is. I had 10,000, downloads or 10,000 views, whatever it is, 10,000 page views. And I would say that these days you probably see half, if not less than half of that. And now you're focused on, do these people actually want to read this stuff? Do they really want to engage with my content? And that's like the obvious thing we should have all been wanting from the beginning, but we got so caught up in like the vanity metrics, and whether that's like on that money side, the money line, like you just talked about, like we just raised $50 million. It's like, great. Are you profitable? How are you going to pay that back? And then same thing with like, when you have like this content, it's like, oh, my content went viral and I got 1 million views on this TikTok video. It's like, well, great. Are you engaged with that audience member, or did that piece of content just fly by and it's like, it's whatever now? It's just like, it doesn't even matter. You'll never get that person to buy or engage with your, with your product. And there was such a push for like, help me create viral content, help me raise all this money. And, a lot of us on the sidelines who weren't doing that, were going like, wait, is this the right way?
Yep.
What are we building with this? Like, what are you expecting out of this? And it's I don't know, say it's funny to see that getting caught up now, or that catching up to that now. But it's just like, yeah, sometimes when you see all this stuff and you're wondering, is this a false floor? It's probably a false floor.
Absolutely. I cannot echo that enough. That actually speaks to exactly what I was referring to in terms of like the DevRel of the 2020, right? They were great. They were getting views. They were getting subscribers. They were coming in, watching the live streams. They were reading the content. They were, previous to COVID, hanging at the events that existed. But GitHub stars were like a huge metric. Oh, do you have GitHub stars? What the heck does that even tell you? GitHub stars tells you nothing. That someone was like, I might build with this one day. It doesn't mean anything, right? And now it's like, what does that actually mean? Which speaks into, or sort of leans into, I had 3 trends. One was VCs and they want revenue. The second one is what I'm going to dive into here, and then we'll get to the AI one. But the second trend is around truth. Right. And I think this is more than anything, we can all relate to this, especially with the election and everything we have going on, is there's no trust anymore. And so the sort of, oh, okay, cool, I'm going to trust what you do is gone. And it's more of like, I don't believe you. And so when an immediate reaction for someone is, I don't believe you and I need to validate. And it's not that they're like, oh, I see you and I think you're a liar. It's just more like the initial sort of trust that we had inside of us has dissipated. And now we want to question everything. And I think that makes business really, really hard, right? What used to be a little bit easier, there was an inclination, there was sort of a curiosity, right? And that curiosity would take you down a path. And now that curiosity needs to be pretty validated and actually pretty warranted for someone to come in and actually want to do business with you, which, gosh, we could really dig out a whole bag of worms when you start talking about trust in this regard.
Yeah, I grew up in car sales. So, like, listen, I've been on both sides. So I totally get it. Like, I totally like get it when people just don't trust you as like that front person. And they're just like, nope, just here, give me the best deal. I got to leave. Like, there's nothing that fortifies you for running your own small business than like selling cars in New England in the, dead of winter. Nobody wants to talk to you. Nobody wants to be outside looking at this car. And they just are at odds with you immediately. Like, the chances are just so slim, to land a deal. And you're like, no, like, you can trust me, whatever. Like, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do right. We're not like this high pressure car sale. I want to get into car sale, but it's like not a high pressure car sales, family owned and all this other stuff. And they're just like immediately coming to war with you.
Yes.
And this was me in car sales, like literally 25 years ago. That's, how long it's been. And it's still, the same. You still see that stuff, happening today. It is crazy. But trust is massive.
That's a perfect analogy, honestly. The world is more like a car sales transaction than it has ever been.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And like, listen, I am, as somebody who grew up in that space, it's oftentimes, you're dealing with, let's say, contractors or other small businesses. And, you're just like, I'm dealing with a plumber a few months ago. And it's just like, half of me wants to be like, where the hell are you, man? Get here, fix my problem. Why did you charge me this money? Why did you show up and say you could do this if you can't do this job, right? But then the other half of me is like, I get it. Like, I get why you're stressed because you're a small business and you got a gazillion things going on and you're just one person, and I'm always like at odds of like where I draw that line, when I'm dealing with people. And it's, I really think like one day if I ever write a book, it's going to be like why everyone should be a car salesperson. Step one, be a car salesman first to really learn what it's like to go through the throes of, one-on-one human interaction in a non-critical sales environment. Like non-critical meaning like this isn't a life-threatening thing. You have choices. And there's a lot to be learned there. And I could get on that car sales soapbox for, forever too, as well. But trust also sort of goes into this like whole AI thing, which I'm sure in your world is, disrupting it at even faster pace than maybe even WordPress with just like so many people onboarding and starting a bit. I've seen so many AI businesses doing things. I'm just like, wow, you're doing that too. But I also have to remember, is that a false floor over there? So how do you transition into AI with all of this stuff?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. Is there a false floor? There is a little bit of a false floor, I think, still. And I think, in terms of kind of back to the VC conversation, I would say of the trends there, like most of the folks that are getting investment funds there's some capacity of like an AI. You're either serving an AI use case or your tool is actually, powered by artificial intelligence in some way, shape, or form. I would say about 50% of my clientele falls into that bucket too, where they're building something in that AI ecosystem or space. I think what's interesting about sort of the trends and what I think is funny. So before I jumped on this call, total developer thing where I was like, and you can relate to this, like, referring to sort of maybe not being fully technical chops, but still like you have that ambition and desire to like build things and create things. I was using Bolt, which I don't know if you've heard of Bolt, but there's like.
Love it. Use it all the time.
Do you? Okay. So
all the time.
Okay, like I have used it a couple times. I built something for my husband because he does AI, but he does cattle artificial insemination. So we joke about how he's in agriculture and I'm in AI technology. But I built him a tool that's like a timing calculator, right? 10 minutes, boom, done. All it did was say his protocols are very timed, right? So one thing has to be done exactly set number of hours after another. It was hard to communicate that to clients. So we're like, pop the first time in and you'll see what the rest of the times look like. Super great, right? Really easy. And I'm like, that seems simple. And then I'm like, okay, let me see if Bolt can do something bigger and bolder than this. So before we got on this recording, I was actually in there and I was building out what I do a lot of times is like I do a lot of channel listening for my clients. And so what that means is that there's a pain point that their product solves, and I'm listening for those conversations that include that pain point so I can say, hey, client, you should go engage in this conversation. And so I wanted to build out essentially this channel discovery. I was like blown away at like it bringing in Reddit APIs and some of this other stuff. And, outside of my own curiosity and things, it's very interesting to see and understand sort of technologically what we can start to sort of cut out and what we can't. And I think that the trends that I'm seeing in AI is that there is a lot of there's a lot of companies and leaders and, the boards, the VCs, the investors, the ones pushing for the big decisions who are like, cut at all costs, cut people, use AI. But at the end of the day, what I'm realizing is that if you don't have sort of the capabilities to validate and verify AI and what it's doing, that it is not something that you can use as a cutting out source. It's more of a supplement. So for me, it's made my role a lot more efficient. And I think for other companies, they're seeing the same. Yes, they can use AI in a developer workflow to start to build things with different AI tools, but a developer that knows what they're doing still has to validate and verify and be involved in that process to understand. So I think that, your listeners likely are in this space of like, oh my gosh, what should I be investing in? What should I be spending time in? How should I be leveraging it? And if I can share any insights there, I think there's so many different tools. And I think just taking a step back and saying, hey, what do I do in my day-to-day workflow that I can potentially bring into some other solution, whether it be content writing, ideation, writing emails, etc. But in terms of, it cutting out our jobs, I think we're years from that. But I do think that we are definitely seeing an evolution of growth where we can definitely do some pretty cool things really quickly.
Yeah. I noticed you didn't say we're decades away. You said years. So
decades or years. Yeah. I'm going to say less than 5.
Yeah, I'll say that. Less than 5. The long would be 10. But certainly two things that actually Bolt has really exposed me to. I went down this path of learning how to code outside of AI. I think it's important, again, for my role at Gravity Forms to understand like what people are doing, and how it's going to impact Gravity Forms. Right? I mean, can you make a form plugin with AI? Yes. Is it going to have the same attention and scale that Gravity Forms has now? No, because the same appreciation that I've uncovered for WordPress, actually building out my own standalone React apps through Bolt and Cursor, and use Bolt as like the front end ideation, and then Cursor to implement the more like strategic parts of it, is what I've been doing the last month or so. You can build these standalone things, but that's it. Like you're the human responsible for it now.
Exactly.
You created it, and if you don't know what the hell you're doing, you're not going to be able to think about what comes next. In that passing moment, you made something awesome. Right. But with WordPress, you would look at it and go, oh, this thing is 20 years old. This is a monolithic app. It's, it's old. It's lethargic. Okay. Totally agree. But it's like 10,000 people plus have touched this app that is running and sustaining, and people are still caring about it. Your little app that you made, sure, you made a WordPress with ChatGPT, but it ain't going anywhere, right? And it's just that, like, it's done. You're not going to sustain it. Now, eventually, I'm sure, these platforms will say, turn on the sustainability module, and it will continue to think and evolve it for you, which is the scary part and amazing part. But, until then, it's like you still need that human interaction for these critical parts that, the human brain needs to interact with, because as powerful as it is, it's just not going anywhere further than where your prompt left it, I guess, if you're the uninitiated.
Exactly.
That was a long rant, but what I wanted to get to was what this also has exposed to me is what I saw early on in the WordPress world, which is like, now I'm learning about all these frameworks, right? Next, JS, React, like all this other stuff, and all these little pockets of communities that exist, just like we see in WordPress, but they're like thousands of tiny little pockets of communities that exist for all this other real world coding. And what this AI thing has done is the same thing Page Builders has done to WordPress. Because now I'm seeing it on the outside where people going, well, if you don't understand how to use this stuff, you shouldn't be coding in AI, right? Which It's the same thing I heard like 15 years ago when people are like, if you're using a page builder, you don't know how to build a website. You shouldn't be doing this. And I'm like, where have I heard this? But oh, wait, I said that 15 years ago to somebody who came in with like Beaver Builder or page. Well, back then it was like Page Lines or Thesis Theme. And you're like, you didn't do this right. All you did was buy this on Theme Forest and launch it. And, until I got educated, obviously, and understood like how people learn. And now people are learning like this with this kind of technology.
Yep.
It's just interesting to see how humans react to maybe not gatekeeping, but they're like, I've put 10 years of sweat equity into this, and now you just showed up and launched a React app with Bolt. That's not fair, right? No real question there, but I don't know if you have like a comment on where that world is heading.
Oh gosh, I very much do, because actually what you were sharing was like, oh yeah, it's all back to that trust, right? It's like, absolutely we can use AI. And I laughed because I understand what you're saying of like, oh, page builders, you don't know what you're doing, right? Because we all sort of like, we get into this space where when someone comes in and they can do something better and quicker, it's like, wait a minute, should we trust that? And then that all comes back to that trust, right? It's like, yes, we're all going to grow, we're all going to evolve, and things are going to change. And there's all these other use cases. And I think that we forget that like we're like one person, and we're using something in the way that we're using it. But we don't think about, people who can't, build something, or people who don't understand how to build a WordPress site without a page builder, or how to build an app without AI, right? But I think what I think you brought a really good point to is like, you can build all these things, but just because you build it, it doesn't mean they're going to come, right? And so I think that that's the point of all of this, of we can create these really great things and it's awesome, but at the end of the day, we still have to be humans that can build a business. We still have to understand the use case. We still have to understand our target audience. We still have to know who's willing to pay for that tool, what they're willing to pay for it. We still have to show up and do the marketing. And yes, we can hire AI to write our content, but that's not how marketing works, right? It's all these different things that go into it. And so when we build these things and they are new and they are early, there's a lack of trust, coming back to that other trend, right? And I think that when we do start to build these things, that's essentially where I feel like both politics and AI have created this lack of trust, right? Of, can we actually create things with AI that has a person behind it that is trustworthy, and utilize it in that way. So I think that's my commentary there, is like, through all of that, it's all been trust, right? Should we trust this? I question this, but what is it that we can do to bring a lot of trust to what we're doing with AI?
I like to blame the bad car salesperson before that started all of this stuff, before AI and politics. Tessa Kriesel, built4.dev. You can go to built4.dev if you want to connect with her services. Anywhere else you want folks to go to say thanks or to connect with you online?
I'm pretty much everywhere across all the socials. So if you're on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Twitter, X, whatever the heck you're on, I'm Tessa K22 in most of those. But happy to engage and chat. I'm a very friendly and personable person. So reach out wherever you're hanging out.
Fantastic stuff. TheWPMinute.com, TheWPMinute.com/subscribe to stay connected. And we'll see you in the next episode.